Hello. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dialogues with Creators. In this episode, I will be talking about the book The Stranger or The Outsider by Albert Camus. I hope that you will listen and find some insights into the book and other literature. Thanks for listening. Of Dialogues with Creators. This is another solo podcast where it's me talking. But the reason I do these is that I do a lot of reading and a lot of thinking, and I have some ideas to share. And I'm a creator too, so this is a monologue with creators. And since I've been doing a lot of podcasts about experts or literature teachers talking about books that they value, I thought that I would do that about a book I read recently that I can't say that I value it, but I found it very important and interesting and would like to discuss it here. And that is about the novel The Stranger or The Outsider by Albert Camus. And in French, it's l'étranger, I think, or l'étranger. And I will not invoke too much of my Spanish or French rather, inflicted upon you. But I want to talk about that book today. And if you haven't read it, it's worth reading. I wouldn't say it's the most worth reading book, but it is worth reading and understanding the philosophical, ideological movements of the 20th century and even today. So let's talk about The Stranger or The Outsider. Let me start with saying I do read a lot. What do I read? Well, first I read material to do this podcast. In the last couple of months, that has been The Republic by Plato, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, Gadley Plain by Jason Dew, and I'm working on Dante's Divine Comedy, which is kind of daunting, even more than The Republic was. I also listen to podcasts, and they recommend books all the time. One I listen to is Old School by Shiloh Brooks, which is about how books can make men more manly. Not that I want to be manly, but he's a lit professor, and he has on some great guests. Of course, it's a mixed bag, and sometimes I skip something. David Mamet was on, and he just cussed too much. And one person talked about Jeffrey Epstein and Lolita, and that was really disturbing. So I don't recommend that one. But most are fascinating and lead me back to books I have read or to others. For example, there was one about the brothers Karamazov and how it led to the start of the Catholic app, Halo, of all things. Another podcast recommendation was Astounding, about how science fiction got started, and The Three-Body Problem and The Memory Police, which is a Japanese science fiction. Three-Body Problem is a Chinese science fiction novel. I'll be reading one thing and be pointed to something else or realize I don't know anything about that subject. That happened with the Arthurian legends. So I've been reading The Once and Future King, although that is not the original Arthurian legends. I'm not sure where to go for those. Finally, I read for research, for presentations, and for other writing of my own. Most of that is nonfiction. Anyway, there's never enough time to read everything. For one of those reasons, I recently went back and read The Stranger by Albert Camus. Why? First, because I read it once before and I just didn't get it. And that frustrates me when I just don't get it. As a rule, I can separate books into those I start and see no reason to finish, those that I read once and figure that was good enough, and those that have to be revisited somehow. The Stranger fit into that category, and the second reading led to this podcast. Second, I went back because it was referenced so much as literature and philosophy. And third, it's short, and you can read it in an afternoon. So I want to talk about the second reading, not the first. This is a book about a man who has no feelings, it seems. And in my second reading, it evoked strong feelings in me. The first time, as I say, I didn't get it and why it was great. I'm not sure it's great, but it definitely deserves to be read, and I understand its influence, even though I wish it weren't so influential. Let's talk about the writer. This is one of those books that doesn't work unless you get the writer and the setting and all that was involved in it. Camus was French by background, but he was part of a large group of inhabitants of Algiers in northern Africa called Pieds Noirs. Algeria, right across the Mediterranean from Spain, was a French colony from the 1840s to 1962. At that time, the Algerians wanted their country back and wanted to stop being a colony. And there was a war, which happened in parts of Africa and Asia after World War II, such as India, the Congo, etc. Camus lived from 1913 to 1960, only 47 years. So he was living during the end of this colonial period and went back to France after World War II. Camus was very poor growing up, but as a French citizen, due to his background, he had some rights and privileges and earned scholarships to study. Camus' rather short life, shortened by a car accident, but also affected by the tuberculosis he had for many years, was provocative. A lot was going on politically and personally. In some ways, one sees an idealist in his biographical information. He wanted to change the world for people. Those people included the Algerians in the colony, the workers in unions, and those fighting against fascism. He was connected with leftism, but fought against oppressors like Stalin on the communist side and Franco of Spain on the fascist side. He was a public intellectual, and he did get around with the women. He was a friend to all the big philosophical names in France and won a Nobel Prize at the age of 44, which is pretty young. That is why a very French-seasoned novel is set in an African nation. The setting of Africa means a few things in my reading. For one, it's hot, and the heat is almost like a character and is definitely a force in the story. The main character is oppressed by the heat and the sun to the point of not knowing what or why he is doing some things. The main character seems not to belong to society, as if his status as a French Algerian or Algerian French, rather than an ethnic Algerian, sets him apart. Makes him different and not fitting in. There also seems to be a sense that civilization is lacking here. Although there is a trial and a court system, it's not like they are really in France. There's something shadowy or an emanation of the real system of justice. The name of the book, originally L'étranger, again, my French isn't great, was translated as The Stranger in the U.S. and as The Outsider in the U.K. He is a stranger and outsider in his mental attitudes, not as much as ethnicity or class. He sets himself apart by how he responds to those around him and what he does in the plot, not by what others do to him. He's not an outcast. He casts himself out, and the rest of his world doesn't understand or accept him. But why would he do that? First, we have to review the plot, which is relatively bare bones as novels go. Meursault, which is his name, and we don't get a first name, is an office worker in Algiers. We don't know his exact age or what he really does. Camus writes the story in first person. Is Meursault an unreliable narrator? Yes and no. We don't have to doubt that he tells what happens, but he is so indifferent and apathetic, or appears to be, that one wonders if they should accept his expression of his emotions, which don't appear to be there. Is he unreliable in revealing himself? I think so, and that he is a stranger to himself as well as his social setting. The first line of the book, and Meursault's first line, is in French, and again, deal with this. Aujourd'hui, maman est morte. Peut être hier, je ne sais pas. Okay. Today, mother died, or maybe yesterday. I don't know. And that's the first two sentences. Okay, what a way to start a novel. Why wouldn't he know? He goes on to explain that he got a telegram from the administrator of the retirement home where his mother lived. Actually, he placed her there. To his society and to readers of that time, he's already branded as someone careless about his mother's well-being, something that will come back to haunt him. I bring this up because the prose in the English translations, which I have to accept is consistent with the French original, is terse in a lot of ways. Not throwaway, but not verbose. I get the feeling from the novel that this character is just too tired to care about much. And there's very much a sense of fatigue throughout the book. I want to read the next two paragraphs because it deceptively and deftly sets up the rest of the book. The home for aged persons is at Marengo, some 50 miles from Algiers. With the 2:00 bus, I should get there well before nightfall. Then I could spend the night there, keeping the usual visual beside the body, and be back here by tomorrow evening. I have fixed it up with my employer for 2 days' leave. Obviously, under the circumstances, he couldn't refuse. Still, I had an idea he looked annoyed, and I said without thinking, "Sorry, sir, but it's not my fault, you know." Afterwards, it struck me I needn't have said that. I had no reason to excuse myself. It was up to him to express his sympathy and so forth. Probably he will do so the day after tomorrow when he sees me in black. For the present, it's almost as if Mother weren't really dead. The funeral will bring it home to me, put an official seal on it, so to speak. Okay. My feeling about this is that they're just cringy and creepy. He doesn't think about his mother's death, how she might have suffered, and what she meant to him, and that really never comes into it. It's totally about his schedule and trip and how other people should react to him. This follows through the first part of the book as he goes to sit vigil with his mother's body, breaking the conventions of the culture in terms of coffee drinking. He wants white coffee. That's either a special type or with milk. My research wasn't clear on that. Instead of black, which he's supposed to drink during the vigil. And he wants the white because it's what he wants. And he smokes a cigarette by her coffin because he wants to, even though it's not done. He wants immediate physical reaction of pleasure without caring about the social conventions expected of him while grieving. To play the social conventions game would be a lie to him. And that's the one thing he won't do, which makes him an outsider or stranger. Equally, he is emotionally detached from people and their reactions, which leads to a string of events that lands him in prison. This detachment seems to mean he has no moral code or either. The book is seen as Camus' argument, if you will, for absurdism. I used to think absurdism and existentialism were the same, but there is a difference. Absurdism is equated or connected with theater of the absurd, but the theater part is an outgrowth of that. Absurdism is not what we find ourselves in crazy, conflicted circumstances. Humor has nothing to do with it as a philosophical standpoint. Forgive me for quoting Wikipedia, but this is a start to understanding. Quote, on the practical level, the conflict underlying the absurd is characterized by the individual struggle to find meaning in a meaningless world. The theoretical component, on the other hand, emphasizes more the epistemic inability of reason to penetrate and understand reality. End quote. The world, reality, the universe in absurdism is irrational and meaningless. People, however, have an inherent desire for reason and meaning, and that is what brings us into crisis and confusion. It's better to just accept reality's meaninglessness and live with it. Wikipedia continues, quote, absurdism and nihilism share the belief that life is meaningless, but absurdists do not treat this as an isolated fact and are instead interested in the conflict between the human desire for meaning and the world's lack thereof, end quote. So I think that's an interesting light. And he never comes out in the book and espouses absurdism, but puts us in this situation in this man's life, in this man's psychology, where this is going on. Existentialism would say that there are ways to find meaning despite the absurdism of reality. Camus did not call himself an existentialist, but an absurdist. So his novels portray people living in this world. Another of his books uses the metaphor of Sisyphus, the mythological character condemned to push the same rock up the hill for eternity. In The Stranger, we see the main character surrounded by others who expect behaviors of him, and he seems to float through, not really stating philosophically what he believes, but just living it. Belief is not the issue. just his reactions and pleasures in the moment. Wikipedia again, and I want to say the article on absurdism is very long in there. Quote, this can be understood in terms of importance and caring. It is absurd that people continue to care about these matters, even though they seem to lack importance on an objective level. His philosophy, because he was a profound writer and thinker. If he is right about absurdism, how does one live? And he wrote a lot about that. One may commit suicide. One may search for a way to find meaning. And the search is the meaning. One may live as one wants, kind of like an extreme libertarian, or what people used to call a libertine, which is a person with no moral compass. Although all of those would cause conflicts, of course, which is what happens in The Stranger. Meursault returns from his mother's funeral, works his dead-end office job, we don't really know what he does, and meets a woman called Marie. They swim, eat, and get intimate. Later on in the story, she wants to marry him, and he's like, okay, if you like that, but it never happens due to other things. The rest of the book hinges on his relationship with a pimp and one of his prostitutes and her Arab brothers and a neighbor who abuses his dog. The story is, as you can tell, pretty dreary. In the first section of 2, he gets into a plot with the pimp to get back at the prostitute whom the pimp thinks is sleeping around on him, and he beats her up. The pimp does. Her brothers want revenge, and Meursault eventually kills one of her brothers on the beach. He has a gun and shoots this man who is an Arab and is referred to as the Arab one time, and then for some reason shoots him 4 more times. Well, why not? I have left out some details because they are dark, and in the book you can read it if you like. And I do recommend it, but not for an uplifting experience. There's not much humor or lightness in the book. Meursault never expresses regret for what he does, but he does express lack of dissatisfaction for how things turn out. And of course, he is arrested for the murder, which he would not say was a murder. The second half of the novel, which is really a novella and not that long, is about his imprisonment and trial. There are some things of which I've never cared to talk, and after a few days, says, and these are the words from the book, there are some things of which I've never cared to talk. And after a few days, after I'd been sent to the prison, I decided that this phase of my life was one of them. However, as time went by, I came to feel that this aversion had no real substance. In point of fact, during those early days, I was hardly conscious of being in prison. I had always a vague hope that something would turn up, some agreeable surprise. The change came soon after Marie's first and only visit. From the day when I got her letter telling me they wouldn't let her come to see me anymore because she wasn't my wife, it was from that day that I realized that this cell was my last home, a dead end, so to speak. So that's early on in section 2 of the book. The following excerpt I'm going to read is about Marie's visit, and it's the only place where he shows some emotion or concern for a person. Camus is not denying emotion exists. The question is, what point is it? What does it mean? He doesn't help his public defender any, who tries to show there has to be something wrong with him because of his behavior at his mother's funeral. Meursault is not interested in a defense. In the second and third and fourth chapters of the second part, I found those the most interesting. They are about his trial. Here is the prosecutor's final speech. Quote, the prosecutor paused again to wipe the sweat off his face. He then explained that his duty was a painful one, but he would do it without flinching. This man has, I repeat, no place in a community whose basic principles he flouts without compunction, nor, heartless as he is, has he any claim to mercy. I ask you to impose the extreme penalty of the law, and I ask it without a qualm. In the course of a long career, in which it has often been my duty to ask for a capital sentence, never have I felt that painful duty weigh so little on my mind as in the present case. In demanding a verdict of murder without extenuating circumstances, I am following not only the dictates of my conscience and a sacred obligation, but also those of the natural and righteous indignation I feel at the sight of a criminal devoid of the least spark of human feeling. End of section. At that point, the judge asks Meursault to speak, and Meursault is, again, confused in the heat, says he didn't intend to kill the Arab and did it because of the sun and the heat, which makes no sense, and then starts to ramble, causing laughter in the court. What follows is one of the few light moments in the book. Quote, "Only one incident stands out. Toward the end, while my counselor rambled on, I heard the tin trumpet of an ice cream vendor in the street, a small, shrill sound cutting across the flow of words. And then a rush of memories went through my mind, memories of a life which was mine no longer and had once provided me with the surest, humblest pleasures, warm smells of summer, my favorite streets, the sky at evening, Marie's dresses and her laugh. The futility of what was happening here seemed to take me by the throat. I felt like vomiting, and I had only one idea: to get it over, to go back to my cell and sleep, end quote." And you can see that's not very uplifting, but that was one of the better parts. Later, his own lawyer tries to defend him as a good person who made a tragic mistake, but the jury votes to have him guillotined for the murder. While the judge and the defender are concerned about his soul, Meursault is not interested in his soul. In the 5th chapter of the second part, the first-person narrative shifts to present tense, and the first mention of spiritual issues comes. A priest comes to him soon before his execution, even though Meursault does not want to talk to him. The priest tries to appeal to him until Meursault attacks the priest in a fit of rage. From that, this excerpt, quote, "In a sort of ecstasy of joy and rage, I poured out on him all the thoughts that had been simmering in my brain. He seemed so cocksure, you see, and yet none of his certainties was worth one strand of a woman's hair. Living as he did, like a corpse, he couldn't even be sure of being alive. It might look as if my hands were empty. Actually, I was sure of myself, sure about everything. Far surer than he, sure of my present life and of the death that was coming. That, no doubt, was all I had. But at least that certainty was something I could get my teeth into, just as it had got its teeth into me." End quote. This scene is very interesting because it shows that in the face of death, he is at least feeling something, mostly for Marie, maybe a little respect for his mother. From the last paragraph, quote, "With death so near, Mother must have felt like someone on the brink of freedom, ready to start life all over again. No one in the world had any right to weep for her. And I, too, felt ready to start life all over again. It was as if that great rush of anger had washed me clean, emptied me of hope, and gazing up at the dark sky spangled with its signs and stars, for the first time, I laid my heart open to the benign indifference of the universe." End quote. And that last sentence is a very famous line from the book. My second reading of The Stranger was more rewarding, and here are my thoughts. I'll start by saying that many people would wonder why I'm praising this bleak, nihilistic novel. It's because it is bleak and nihilistic that I am reading it and talking about it. I'm not sure I could say I'm praising it, not like I would many other books. The very existence of this novel negates his message, his premise, as far as I'm concerned. Why create literature and tell a story if there's no purpose or meaning to the world? Why use language and text in a logical, syntactical, and in his case, brilliant way if there is no reason to our existence or the universe? This is why I never understood Foucault and deconstructionism, although I admit I had not studied them in much depth. Secondly, I believe it has a rightful place in literature and should be read in college at least. Granted, this is a translation and something is always lost in translation. Even the first line, "Today, Mother died," and the later one, I laid my heart open to the benign indifference of the universe have been debated about in terms of the right way to translate them. The word benign may be tender, which is different. Tender indifference is to me an oxymoron or an attempt at humor due to irony. Third, it should even more be read by Christians to understand cultural thought. I think the brothers Karamazov would be a good counter reading, although it would take a whole semester to really give these their due. Camus says there is no meaning. Dostoevsky says there is, but there's more to it than that. There is meaning only if one believes in God and how he has revealed himself in Christ. Let me say here that in both cases, the writers may have been or were flawed vessels. Dostoevsky was a compulsive, and I mean compulsive gambler, unable to stop. Camus cheated on his wife and probably other women. I think we are all in that category, though. I want to write about topics that I do not necessarily live in full agreement with, or the standards I would want to profess are not always the ones I live up to. Number 4, we should all contemplate what gives meaning. I'm afraid a lot of so-called American Christians would read The Stranger and either dismiss it as pointless or be drawn into its arguments. One needs a deeper sense of what does bring meaning than the daily diet of pop culture religion. I think the priest is portrayed as compassionate and concerned, but also as a straw man in terms of philosophy. He is a foil in the book, maybe, but he is not capable of breaking through Meursault's nihilism and apathy and lack of concern for his spiritual existence. Of course, when we read the book, we would be tempted to pathologize Meursault. We would just say he has a mental illness and needs medication, but that's not the point of the book. I don't know if Camus is really concerned about Meursault. Perhaps he is a foil as well. The only thing that rescues me from thinking that fully is that Camus has just created a character to prove a point rather than writing about a real person in particular. On the other hand, that writing is so particular and powerful. Number 5, Camus' philosophy had a strong libertarian streak in it. And this book screams extreme individualism. Meursault, I'm doing something. Okay. Conception of himself as part of a community, tribe, society, religious group, even family. He never knew his father, who was apparently a soldier. He has no siblings, and his mother is dead. And before that, put away in a home 2 hours away. Camus himself never knew his father, so there is a great deal of autobiography here, at least emotionally. Does the absurdism view create the disconnection and fragmentation, or is it the other way around? He doesn't feel responsible for anyone else or that his actions affect anyone else. Even with his liaison with Marie is about how he feels, not her benefit. So it is not love. Love, agape, does not exist in this world. Neither does phileo. I have often pondered how God does give us meaning. We don't think about it much. There is so much going on in our world that we don't have time to ponder such things. And we distract ourselves so we don't have to. How does the existence of God relate to a meaningful universe? It's more than Jesus loves you. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Or is it more? I sing Jesus Loves Me to my granddaughter for nap time, and I was happy to hear her singing to herself today. Of course, it's her version of it, but her 2-year-old self had Jesus in there and got the tune right. So let me start there. This little girl knows nothing but love from everyone in her orbit, and literally, it is her orbit. At her last 2 Thanksgivings at my house, she totally held court as the only grandchild in 2 families. She knows security from harm and would never for a moment consider there is nothing to eat or no warm, comfy bed to sleep in. No one tells her she's a bad girl or a stupid child or abuses her vocally, and of course, not physically. The Christian worldview, faith, religion, message, church, whatever you want to call it, presents God, the Father, is not entirely different from what my granddaughter is going through. He gives perfect love and care for his children and creation. However, at some point, my granddaughter will face reality and find out everything is not perfect, and things do hurt, and people are mean, and she'll have to deal with it. I'm not trying to infantilize the gospel or believers, don't get me wrong. We all struggle with God is good, but horrible stuff happens every day. Sandy Hook, abusers who never meet justice, famine in the Sudan, war, cancer, tornadoes that kill whole families. I could go on and on. American Christianity has at times been very guilty of ignoring these realities. One of our great theological sins, along with making faith too fast and easy. Dostoevsky dealt with this. Many writers have, and not everyone is satisfied with the literary or theology answers. The main one being to me that Christ entered the world to suffer with us and to bring hope of final justice and correction. But for a lot of people, believing that is a huge ask, as it is said today. To focus on God as good all the time, and loving and benevolent, seems like living like an ostrich, ignoring what's really going on. To see only the bad, which many so-called atheists do, and decide they hate the God they don't believe in, which I consider a great irony, is an affront to the God who gives them life and offers grace if they come to him through Christ. But why does it have to be on God's terms? That goes to the meaning question. The world is not rational or irrational by its own terms or by humans' definition. It is God-centered. Charles Taylor, in The Secular Age, a book I admit I have not finished, confession, writes about disenchantment since the Age of Reason or Enlightenment. Personally, I don't think everyone before 1650 was living in an age of magic and mysticism, but the Western and the Eastern world as a whole saw the world as God-centered. God is neither rational or irrational. He is other and communicates to us through our concepts of rationality and language. And God acts in ways he do not understand at times. But I would say that 99.9% of the time, it's predictable and orderly and open to understanding through science. That's another problem I tend to have with American Christianity, especially evangelicalism. Too many of us, like my granddaughter, think we are in the center of everything, is God is going to move mountains to make our lives according to our wishes and conveniences. And when they're not, we have to face suffering. Camus saw the world as without meaning because, well, why not? He had witnessed a lot of bad and probably denied access to true relationships with people of faith who could model or explain that a God-centered reality represents meaning. He could have been exposed to all that and still chosen absurdism, which he did not create, but espoused as one of its main voices. By the way, existentialism and absurdism are often conflated, but there is a difference in terms of pure philosophy, one lost on most people. Existentialism is about how to live life since it's absurd, how to find some semblance of meaning, usually by action. Interestingly, today I read an essay by Arthur Brooks, and let me say I've been working on this essay for a while, but he is an expert on happiness and a professor at Harvard, which means he has to be correct, I suppose. And he was writing on conspiracy theorists and the people who fall for them. And he connects conspiracy theory attraction to our search for meaning. He writes, quote, "Rather, psychologists believe that these conspiracy theory narratives can be so compelling to regular people because they meet three deep human needs. The first is epistemic, which refers to the need to understand one's environment in an increasingly complex world. The second is existential, which is to feel safe and in control of one's environment. The third is social, referring to the need to maintain a positive image of oneself and one's social group. Another way to account for these needs is that people crave coherence. In other words, an answer to the question of why things happen the way they do, from the weather to political events and world affairs. And I would add personal tragedy. According to the psychologists Frank Martella and Michael F. Stega, coherence is one element of the meaning of life. The other two are purpose, in other words, where you are going in life, and significance, why your life matters. Without a sense of coherence, one's life is bereft of meaning. Meaning, in turn, is central to human happiness." End quote. I conclude that because to have meaning, one must see the world as God-centered. What one must see humans as made in the image of God, not just yourself. This phrase is so full of meaning, this imago Dei phrase, that I can't deal with it here. But it gives humans a dignity that we as a race constantly belittle. The imago Dei is the answer to meaning. Our purpose is to live up to that image of God. Ironically, Camus, despite his absurdism, was very concerned about changing the world through communism, syndicalism, which is a viewpoint that centers on labor unions as a way to arrange society, and anti-fascism. He lived during World War II in France and saw plenty to change. His stance that life is absurd did not stop him from giving his life to make order in a world supposed to be without order and reason. I've given a brief look at this work that left a strong impression on me. I have to invoke Francis and Edith Schaefer here of L'Abri Fellowship, who devoted their lives to working with young people in Europe who lived in Camus' world. Their work was not just about arguing proposition. It was really about making order in a world through fellowship, community, hospitality, and friendship with these young people in the post-World War II, Cold War Europe and U.S. We need more of their kind, although today there's a different kind of and a reason for the fragmentation and lack of community. Today, young people don't even know how much they need real community because they have been seduced into thinking online relationships are real community. Thanks for listening. You can find The Stranger online in PDF form, but holding a real book is always better.